The sapphire room of Larkhollow Palace smelled like beeswax candles and old paper, and Princess Elara Thornwarren had never hated a smell so much in her life. She sat at the head of the long table, spine straight the way her mother had trained into her since she was old enough to sit up on her own, ears held in the perfect polite upright position that meant I am listening and I am gracious and I am not, under any circumstances, going to scream. Around her, 6 members of the marriage council shuffled papers that would decide the rest of her life, and not one of them had asked her a single question that mattered. "The Duke of Ravenhollow has renewed his interest," said Minister Colthorne, not looking up from his ledger. "As has the second son of the Valebrook line. Both are amenable to an accelerated timeline." Amenable. As if she were a shipping contract. Elara's left ear twitched. Just slightly, just enough that anyone who'd spent years learning to read her would have caught it. Nobody at this table had spent years learning to read her. That was rather the point of a marriage council. "I would like," she said, when the ministers paused for breath. 1 week. Colthorne blinked. "Your Highness? 1 week. Before negotiations formally open with either house." She kept her voice level, the way she'd practiced in the mirror 100 times. "You have been planning my future for 3 months without me in the room. I am asking for 7 days that belong to no one but myself before I hand the rest of it over." There was a long silence, the kind that had texture and weight in a room full of people who did not like to be surprised. "That is unconventional," said the Duchess Marrow, the oldest and least easily moved of the ministers. "But not, I think, unreasonable. A week of rest before a lifetime of duty." "Where would your Highness intend to go?" "Away," Elara said. "Somewhere with no cameras, no dignitaries, and no one from either the Ravel or Valebrook houses within 100 miles. I will bring 1 security escort, of my own choosing, and no attendants. 1 escort seems insufficient, I know. It is also final." Her ears had gone very still now, the way they did only when she had genuinely made up her mind and was daring anyone to test it. "I have given this family every polite, cooperative version of myself for 26 years. I am asking for a week. I do not think that is an unreasonable exchange." Minister Colthorne looked like he wanted to argue. The Duchess Marrow, who had known Elara's mother and had perhaps a longer memory for how badly it went when a Thornwarren woman was pushed too far, laid a hand on his arm. 7 days, the Duchess said. "And then negotiations begin in earnest, with your full cooperation." "You have my word. Who is this escort?" Elara did not hesitate. She had, in fact, already decided 3 weeks ago, on a night she couldn't sleep, and had walked the East Garden path at 2 in the morning and found the one person in the entire palace who hadn't bowed, hadn't gushed, hadn't treated her like a delicate ornamental thing, just nodded once and said, "Can't sleep either, Highness?" Like she was a person having a person's kind of night. "Officer Daniel Reyes," she said. "From the Northern Gate detail." Daniel found out he'd been selected the way he found out most things that mattered in his life, second-hand, from someone else's clipboard. "You've got special assignment," said Captain Whitlock, sliding a folder across the security office desk without looking up from his coffee. "Personal detail. Princess Elara. 1 week, off palace grounds, undisclosed location until departure." Daniel set down the radio he'd been recalibrating. "Me? You." "Apparently she asked for you by name." Whitlock did look up then, and there was something in his expression, not quite a smirk, not quite concern. "Don't know what you did to catch royal attention, Reyes, but pack light and don't screw it up. This is the kind of assignment that makes careers or ends them." Daniel had been a security officer at Larkhollow for 4 years. He'd started on perimeter duty, worked his way up through the East Wing, and had spent the last 8 months on rotation near the private gardens, which was, he suspected now, exactly how he'd ended up on Princess Elara's radar in the first place. He'd passed her maybe a dozen times on those garden walks. He'd never once treated her like royalty because, frankly, treating people like royalty had never come naturally to him, and something about the particular exhausted, careful way she held herself had made him not want to add to the weight. He remembered the night she couldn't sleep. He remembered thinking, at the time, that it was none of his business to wonder why a princess would be pacing garden paths at 2 in the morning with her ears pinned flat and her jaw tight enough to crack a walnut. He'd said the only thing that felt honest, which was an acknowledgement that neither of them could sleep, and she had laughed, actually laughed, a short, surprised sound like she hadn't expected to, and they talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The color of the roses in the dark. Whether owls got bored. He hadn't expected that to be an audition. He definitely hadn't expected to pass. Undisclosed location, he repeated. She didn't say why? Above my pay grade, Reyes. Above yours too, probably. Just be at the East Courtyard tomorrow at 6 a.m. with a bag and your dress uniform. Whitlock paused. And Reyes, whatever you did right, keep doing it. This is a good look for the department. Daniel didn't sleep much that night either. Not out of nerves about the job, he guarded delegations, handled 2 attempted break-ins during his tenure, once talked down a drunk baron who'd wandered into the wrong wing at a gala. He could do protection. What kept him up was the particular quality of Princess Elara's voice when she'd said, on their one strange middle-of-the-night conversation, "You're the only person in this building who's ever asked me what I think instead of what I want to hear." He hadn't known what to do with that sentence then. He still didn't. The private airship that collected them the next morning was smaller than Daniel expected, sleek, unmarked, no royal crest on the hull. Elara was waiting at the courtyard when he arrived, and for a moment he almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the formal court dress, the jeweled circlet, the careful powder that made her look more porcelain than person. She wore a simple traveling coat the color of dusk, her ears loose and mobile instead of pinned into the rigid court posture, and there was color in her face that hadn't been there in the sapphire room, high in her cheeks, something like anticipation. "Officer Reyes," she said, and her mouth curved. "You came." "Wasn't exactly optional, Highness." He set his duffel down and gave a short, professional bow. "Captain Whitlock briefed me on the assignment parameters. I understand I'm your sole security detail for the duration. I've reviewed emergency protocols for Daniel." She said his name like she was setting something down. "You can stop doing that." "Doing what?" The voice. The posture. "That thing you do where you turn into a very polite wall." One of her ears flicked, amused. "I asked for you specifically because you don't do that. Please don't start now." He straightened, a little thrown. "Apologies, Highness. Old habits. Elara. At least while we're away from the palace. Please." Something flickered behind her eyes, a request that mattered more than its casual delivery let on. "I have had 4 months of people using my title like a leash. I would like 1 week where somebody uses my name." "Elara," he said, testing the shape of it. It felt strange and warm in his mouth, like admitting to something. Her ears rose, both of them, all the way up, an expression he hadn't yet learned to read but that made something in his chest loosen anyway. "There. Was that so terrible? Ask me again in a week." She laughed, that same short, surprised sound from the garden, and gestured him toward the airship. "Come on, then. We have a resort to reach, and I intend to enjoy every minute of not being anyone's future duchess." The flight took most of the day, low and quiet over green hill country and then blue water, and Daniel spent most of it doing what he did best, watching. Not in a bodyguard way, exactly, though there was some of that too, checking exits, noting the pilot's credentials, cataloging the emergency supplies in the cabin. Mostly he watched Elara, who spent the flight with her nose pressed almost childishly to the window, narrating the landscape to herself in a low murmur that he didn't think she meant for him to hear. "There's the Valebrook border. Don't have to think about that for a week. There's the coast. I've never actually seen the ocean, not really, not without 12 attendants standing behind me making sure I didn't get sand on my dress." "You've never seen the ocean?" he asked, before he could stop himself. She turned from the window, ears dropping slightly, caught. Not properly. Once, from a balcony, at a diplomatic function. I was not permitted closer than 50 feet. Apparently princesses do not wade. This princess is about to. Her whole face changed, surprised, then something helpless and delighted that she seemed to be trying, and failing, to smother. Is that a promise, Officer Reyes? Daniel, he corrected, and her ears shot straight up again, and he understood, distantly, that he had just agreed to something considerably larger than a job. The resort was called the Tidewell Retreat, a scatter of white buildings built into a cliffside over water so clear it looked poured rather than filled, accessible only by private airship and, according to the brochure Daniel had glanced at, currently hosting exactly one other guest party on the entire island. The staff met them on the private dock with an efficiency that suggested significant advanced planning, and an enthusiasm that suggested something else entirely. Your Highness! Officer Reyes! A rabbit woman in the resort's cream and gold uniform bowed low, ears sweeping the dock boards. We are so honored to host you both. Everything has been arranged exactly as you requested. The honeymoon suite is ready, the private beach has been cleared for the week, and the kitchen has prepared the celebratory dinner menu for this evening. Daniel blinked. The what suite? The Sapphire Point Honeymoon Suite. The staff member said, beaming, apparently mistaking his confusion for delighted disbelief. Princess Elara's booking was very specific. We don't often get royal honeymoons here at Tidewell. This is a tremendous honor for the staff. She turned to Elara with something like reverence. Congratulations, Your Highness. Truly. Daniel looked at Elara. Elara looked at the ocean. Thank you, Elara said smoothly, in the exact tone she must have used on 1,000 ministers. We're delighted to be here. The staff member led them up a stone path toward the cliffside buildings, chattering about turn-down service and private dining, and Daniel fell into step beside Elara with his jaw set and his voice pitched low enough for only her ears, which, he now understood with a fresh jolt of information, were extremely good at picking up quiet things. Elara. Why does the staff think we're on our honeymoon? She did not look at him. Her ears, however, had gone very carefully neutral. The exact rigid posture she'd worn at the palace, the one she'd asked him not to make her watch anymore. I may have made the booking myself, she said, under my own name. And I may have indicated a certain relationship status in order to secure the most private accommodations available on short notice. You told them we're married. I told them nothing explicit. I simply did not correct an assumption made by a booking clerk who saw a princess reserving a suite for two and drew the obvious conclusion. She finally glanced at him, chin lifted in a way he was starting to recognize as the shield she wore when she expected to be scolded. It seemed the fastest way to guarantee absolute privacy. No press, no diplomatic protocol, no one from either the Ravel or Valebrook houses tracking my location. A honeymoon booking draws considerably less attention than a princess traveling alone with a single security officer. That's... He stopped himself, recalibrated. Professional. Stay professional. That's a significant assumption for the staff to be operating under for an entire week. Would you prefer I correct it? Her voice had an edge now, something brittle underneath the practiced smoothness. Announce to the entire resort staff that actually, no, this is my bodyguard, please treat him accordingly. Watch everyone's demeanor change the moment they realize I'm still exactly what I always am, royal, watched, unavailable. Daniel didn't answer right away. Ahead of them, the staff member was gesturing at a cliffside path with genuine, uncomplicated joy, describing sunset views like she was handing them a gift. No, he said finally. I suppose not. Elara's ears eased, just slightly. Thank you. For the record, he added, I'm still doing my job. Whatever the staff thinks the arrangement is. Of course. Something flickered across her face that he couldn't quite name, disappointment, maybe, quickly hidden. Naturally. The Sapphire Point Honeymoon Suite was, Daniel had to admit, spectacular in a way that made his years of stay-visit security work feel suddenly very small. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing open water. A private plunge pool on the terrace. A bed the size of a small boat, draped in white linen and scattered, he noted with a mixture of horror and reluctant amusement, with actual rose petals. There was, notably, only one bed. "I'll take the couch," he said immediately, already scanning the sitting room for a piece of furniture long enough to accommodate his 6-foot frame. There wasn't one. There was, in fact, no couch at all. Just 2 low armchairs and a chaise that would leave his feet dangling somewhere around the coffee table. "Don't be ridiculous," Elara said, dropping her travel bag onto a bench with the casual grace of someone shedding a costume. "The bed is enormous. We're both adults. I trust you not to violate my honor, Officer Reyes, and if you're half as professional as your file suggests, you'll manage a week of proximity without incident." "That's not—" "I'm not worried about incident, I'm worried about—" He stopped, aware he was digging himself deeper. "It's not appropriate." "Nothing about this week is appropriate," Elara said, and there was something almost gleeful in it, some pressure valve finally releasing after months, years, of careful behavior. "That is rather the point. For 1 week, I would like to be a person who does inappropriate things, like sharing a bed with a friend and swimming in an ocean I'm not supposed to touch, and eating dessert before dinner if the mood strikes me." She turned to face him fully, ears up, eyes bright. "Will you let me have that, Daniel? Just for a week?" He looked at her. Really looked, the way he hadn't quite let himself since the airship, since the garden, since whenever exactly this assignment had stopped feeling like a job and started feeling like something with no name he was prepared to say out loud. "Yeah," he said. "Okay. I can do that." Her whole posture changed, ears lifting fully, something like triumph breaking across her face. "Good. Because I already told the kitchen we'd like dinner on the terrace at sunset, and I refuse to eat it alone while you stand in the corner pretending to watch the horizon for assassins." There could be assassins. On an island with a guest list of 2? Live dangerously, officer. Dinner on the terrace was candlelit. Actual candles, actual flowers, a small orchestra of insects somewhere in the dark hedges below the cliff. And Daniel spent the first 20 minutes deeply, professionally uncomfortable before he simply gave up and let himself enjoy it. Elara ate with her fingers when the staff wasn't watching, licked sauce off her thumb with an unself-consciousness that suggested this, too, was rebellion, and told him, unprompted, in a rush like she'd been saving it, about growing up as the only heir with no siblings to share the pressure, about a mother who died when Elara was 12 and left her to be raised entirely by a marriage counsel with a fondness for spreadsheets. "They started discussing candidates when I was 16, she said, swirling wine she'd only taken 2 sips of. 16, Daniel. I hadn't even finished my education and there were already 3 men being vetted for compatibility with my bloodline. That's—" He searched for a word that wasn't a curse. "That's a lot. It's normal for royalty. Or it's supposed to be. I used to think I was simply bad at accepting my duty, that other princesses managed this without wanting to scream into a pillow every night." Her ear twitched, that small honest tell he'd learned to watch for. "Then I met you in the garden, and you asked me what I thought instead of what I wanted to hear, and I realized I wasn't bad at accepting my duty. I was just lonely in a very specific, very expensive way, and nobody had ever noticed." Daniel didn't have a smooth response to that. He wasn't a smooth person, generally. He was steady, and quiet, and good at showing up rather than talking, and so instead of a clever answer he simply reached across the small table and covered her hand with his. Her ears shot straight up, both of them, delight naked and immediate on her face before she could compose it into anything more diplomatic. "You're doing the thing," he said, "where your ears say what you're actually feeling before your mouth catches up. I'm aware." She didn't pull her hand away. "It's a lifelong source of embarrassment. My tutors tried for years to train it out of me. Apparently rabbits are supposed to have better emotional control. I like it, Daniel said plainly, because he'd never been good at anything but plain. I always know where I stand with you. That's rare, in the palace. Her ears, if anything, rose higher. Where do you stand with me, then, Daniel? Since apparently my ears have already told you. He looked at her hand under his, at the candlelight catching the fine fur along her wrist, at the woman who had spent 4 months being auctioned off by spreadsheet and had chosen, out of every escort available to her, a quiet security officer who never once treated her like an ornament. Somewhere I didn't expect to be standing, he admitted. And somewhere I'm not in a hurry to leave. Neither of them said anything else for a long moment. The insects kept singing in the hedges. The candle guttered once in the sea breeze and steadied. Good, Elara said finally, very quietly. Neither am I. She dragged him into the ocean the next morning before he'd finished his coffee. Elara, I have a job to do. I need to do a perimeter check of the perimeter is an island with 1 dock and a cliff. I have surveyed it myself. There is nothing here but us, several extremely judgmental seagulls, and water I have wanted to swim in since I was 7 years old. She was already ankle-deep, traveling coat abandoned somewhere on the sand, wearing a simple green swimming costume that made Daniel acutely aware he needed to find something professional to look at that was not, in fact, Princess Elara Thornwarren's collarbone. Come in, or I will assume my personal security detail has been compromised and scream very loudly until the entire resort staff investigates. That's blackmail. It's motivation. She grinned. Full, unguarded, nothing like the careful court smile from the sapphire room. Come on, Daniel. Live dangerously. He came in. The water was warm and impossibly clear, and Elara swam like someone discovering an entire limb she hadn't known she had. Clumsy at first, then increasingly confident, laughing every time a wave knocked her off balance, ears plastered flat and wet against her skull in a way that made her look younger, softer, entirely unlike the composed heir who'd sat through marriage council meetings with her spine rigid and her face arranged. Nobody told me it would feel like this, she said, treading water beside him, breathless. Nobody told me the ocean actually holds you up. I thought it would feel like drowning slowly. It feels like. She searched for the word, eyes bright. It feels like being allowed. Allowed to what? Anything. Everything. I don't know. She splashed him, sudden and delighted, and when he splashed her back she shrieked with a laugh so unguarded it startled a nearby gull into flight. You're supposed to let the princess win, Officer Reyes. I don't let anyone win. Occupational hazard. Then I'll simply have to win honestly. She dove at him without warning, dunking him under with more enthusiasm than actual leverage, and when he surfaced, spluttering, she was already 3 feet away laughing so hard she'd gone half underwater herself. He caught her around the waist before he'd consciously decided to. She went still against him, water streaming off both of them, her ears rising slowly from their flattened swimming posture into something else entirely, soft, alert, close. Daniel. Yeah. You're not doing your job right now. No, he agreed. I'm really not. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the water lapping quietly around them, the whole island holding its breath. Then Elara reached up, hesitant, for the first time all week, some old instinct toward caution flickering across her face, and touched his jaw, water-slick fingers tracing along it like she was memorizing something. May I? Yeah, Daniel said before she'd finished the question, because he already knew what she was asking and the answer had apparently been building in him since a 2 a.m. garden conversation about owls and boredom. Yes. She kissed him. It wasn't practiced or careful, the way he suspected most things in her life were required to be. It was clumsy with newness, salt water and sunlight and something that trembled slightly at the edges. A woman doing something entirely for herself, possibly for the first time in her adult life, and doing it badly and gladly. When she pulled back, her ears were fully upright, nose twitching in rapid little movements that he was beginning to understand, with some wonder, meant this matters, this is real, don't let this be a mistake. Well, she said, a little unsteadily. That's rather more than a swimming lesson. Rather, Daniel agreed, and kissed her again before either of them could think better of it. What followed was, by Daniel's own private accounting, the best week of his adult life, and also the most professionally compromised he had ever been. They swam every morning. Elara insisted on it with the fervor of a woman making up for 26 years of forbidden ocean, and Daniel, official bodyguard, sworn to vigilance, spent most of those mornings watching her rather than watching for threats, which he told himself was still technically surveillance. They ate breakfast on the terrace, lunch on the beach, dinner by candlelight, and somewhere around Wednesday, Elara stopped performing the adjusting to civilian life roles she'd carried in for the resort staff and simply became a woman he recognized from the garden. Sharp-tongued, curious about everything, prone to asking pointed questions about his childhood that he found himself answering honestly for the first time in years. He told her about his mother, a schoolteacher who'd raised him alone and died proud of him the year before he joined palace security. He told her about wanting, once, to be an architect, before the money for university evaporated along with his father's employment. He told her things he hadn't told the friends he'd known for a decade, and every time, her ears would soften and lower slightly, attentive, unguarded, and she'd say something like "Thank you for telling me that" in a voice that made it clear she understood exactly what it cost him. "You're very good at listening," he told her Thursday night, both of them tangled comfortably on the enormous bed after a day spent hiking the island's single modest hill, not touching in any way that required a name yet but close enough that the space between them had stopped feeling like a professional buffer. "I've had extensive training in appearing to listen," Elara said. 26 years of council meetings. But this, she gestured vaguely between them. "This is the first time I've actually wanted to hear the answer instead of simply waiting my turn to speak. High praise. The highest I know how to give." Her ear flicked thoughtful. "Daniel, can I ask you something and have you answer honestly, even if the honest answer is uncomfortable?" He turned toward her, giving her his full attention the way he'd learned over the course of the week, that she noticed and valued more than any compliment. "Yeah. Always. When this week ends. When we return to the palace and I become Princess Elara again, and you become Officer Reyes again, and I am handed back to Minister Coldhorn's spreadsheet, what happens to this?" Her voice had gone careful, the court composure creeping back in at the edges, an old habit protecting against an answer she was clearly afraid of. "I need to know if I am imagining a connection that only exists because we are somewhere the rules don't reach, or if it is real enough to survive contact with my actual life." Daniel was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer but because he wanted to give her the true one instead of the easy one. "I've been protecting you for 4 years, he said finally. "Perimeter duty, guard and rotation, whatever they assigned me. And in 4 years I never once thought about you the way I've thought about you this week. That's not the ocean talking, Elara. That's not the candles or the honeymoon suite or however many rose petals the staff keep replacing. That's just you. Being allowed to be a person instead of a title for 7 days, and me getting to actually see who that person is." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind one very attentive ear. "I don't know what happens when we go back. I know I don't want to pretend this didn't happen." Her ears rose slowly, fully, nose twitching in that rapid, honest way that told him everything before her voice caught up. "Then we won't pretend," she said. "Whatever else happens. We won't pretend." They came on Saturday morning, a full day ahead of schedule, while Elara and Daniel were still tangled together on the terrace watching the sunrise burn orange across the water. A small diplomatic airship touching down at the private dock with considerably less grace than the one that had carried them there. Minister Coldhorn emerged first, followed by 2 junior aides and, to Elara's visible dismay, the Duchess Marrow herself. "Your Highness." Coldhorn's voice carried up the cliff path with the particular strain of a man who had rehearsed his opening line and was already regretting it. "Negotiations with House Valebrook have accelerated. The Duke wishes to formalize the engagement by month's end. We require your presence at the palace immediately. Elara stood, wrapping her robe tighter, and Daniel watched her transform in real time, shoulders squaring, ears settling into that rigid court posture, the playful, unguarded woman of the past 6 days folding herself carefully away like something too precious to risk in front of an audience. You said 1 week, she said, and her voice had gone flat and formal, though Daniel caught the tremor underneath it. I have 2 days remaining. Circumstances have changed, Your Highness. The Duchess Marrow's eyes moved from Elara to Daniel and back again, calculating something with the sharp attention of a woman who had survived 4 decades of palace politics by missing nothing. The Valebrook family has requested an accelerated timeline. There is some urgency. Some urgency, Elara repeated. I see. The staff member who had greeted them on arrival appeared at the top of the path, wringing her hands. Your Highness, I do apologize. I informed the officials this was a private honeymoon, and they insisted. A honeymoon, the Duchess said, and something shifted in her expression, not quite surprise, more like a puzzle piece finally locating its place. Yes. I imagine that explains a great deal, doesn't it, Elara? The silence that followed had weight. Give us a moment, Elara said finally to the officials, in a voice that brooked no argument despite its steadiness. I will meet you at the dock within the hour. She didn't speak again until the officials had retreated down the path, out of earshot, and even then it took her a long moment to find her voice. I have a choice to make, she said, staring at the water rather than at Daniel. I can walk down to that dock, tell them the honeymoon booking was a misunderstanding, apologize for any confusion, and return to the palace as Princess Elara Thornwarren, future Duchess of Valebrook, exactly as scheduled. Her ears had gone very still, the way they did only in moments of enormous, deliberate control. Or I can tell them the truth. Which is that I did not accidentally book a honeymoon suite. She finally turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with something that looked like fear and looked like courage wearing the same expression. That I chose you, Daniel? Not as protection. Not as an escort of convenience. I have thought about you since a 2 a.m. conversation about owls, and I brought you to the one place on earth where nobody could stop me from finding out if that meant something, and it did. It does. Her voice cracked slightly. But if I say that out loud, in front of the Duchess Marrow, there is no going back to being a compliant princess who marries a duke by month's end. There will be scandal. There will be a fight with the council I am not certain I can win. There may be a fight with the crown itself. Elara. I need to know, she said, ears trembling now, all pretense of court composure gone. Whether you would stand beside me if I chose the harder path. Because I have spent my entire life doing what was expected, and I find I am finally ready to do something else. But I do not want to do it alone, and I do not want to ask you to bear that weight if you are not ready to bear it. Daniel had spent 4 years being the quiet, professional wall in the corner of rooms much grander than this one. He had watched dignitaries make choices that reshaped kingdoms and never once been asked what he thought about any of it. He was being asked now. I stopped being your employee somewhere around Tuesday, he said. Probably earlier, if I'm honest. I'm not standing beside you because it's my job, Elara. I'm standing beside you because there's nowhere else I want to be. He took her hand steady, the way he'd learned steadied her too. Go tell them the truth. I'll be right there when you do. Her ears shot fully upright, nose twitching in that rapid, unguarded rhythm, and for a moment she looked less like a princess bracing for scandal and more like a woman who had just been handed exactly what she'd hoped for and hadn't quite believed she'd get. All right then, she said, and her voice had steadied into something Daniel hadn't heard from her before, not the careful diplomat's tone, not the playful vacation voice, but something new entirely. A woman who had made her decision. Let's go tell them the truth. The Duchess Marrow watched them descend the cliff path with the patient attention of a woman who had already guessed the shape of what was coming, and was simply waiting to see if the princess had the nerve to say it aloud. Your Highness, Minister Colthorne began, already reaching for his ledger. If we depart within the hour, we can reach Lark Hollow by evening, and I can begin drafting the formal engagement documents for. There will be no engagement documents, Elara said. The words landed on the dock like a dropped stone. Colthorn's mouth opened and closed. One of the junior aides actually took a half-step backward. Your Highness, the arrangement with House Valebrook has been in negotiation for. I am aware of how long it has been in negotiation, Minister. I sat through every meeting. Elara's chin was lifted, her ears fully upright. Not the rigid court posture, Daniel noticed, but something more deliberate, more chosen. I asked the council for 1 week that belonged to me. I intend to honor the spirit of that request rather than simply its letter, and the spirit of it is this: I will not be marrying the Duke of Valebrook. I will not be marrying anyone selected by spreadsheet and political convenience. That chapter of my life is finished. Elara, the Duchess said quietly, be very careful what you say next. Once spoken, some things cannot be unspoken. Good. Elara reached back and took Daniel's hand, and did not let go, and did not look away from the Duchess's face while she did it. This is Daniel Reyes. He was assigned to me as a security escort for this trip. He is also the man I intend to marry, if he'll have me, and the honeymoon suite booking was not a misunderstanding by resort staff. It was accurate. Belatedly. The silence on the dock stretched long enough that Daniel could hear the waves against the pilings, a gull crying somewhere overhead, his own pulse loud in his ears. This is highly irregular, Colthorn finally managed. Everything about me has always been highly irregular, Minister. You've simply never been permitted to notice, because I have spent 26 years making certain you didn't have to. Elara's grip on Daniel's hand tightened, and he squeezed back steady. I am not asking the Council's permission. I am informing you of my decision, out of respect for the years of service you've all given the crown, and I am prepared to face whatever consequences follow. But I will not spend the rest of my life married to a stranger for the sake of a treaty when I have finally discovered what it feels like to choose someone, for myself. The Duchess Marrow studied her for a long moment, and something in the old woman's severe face shifted. Not approval, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe? The particular respect one stubborn woman sometimes affords another. Your mother, the Duchess said slowly, once told me the same thing, nearly word for word, the week before she married your father instead of the man the council had selected for her. It caused no small amount of chaos at the time. A pause. The kingdom survived it. I imagine it will survive this as well. Elara's ears, already upright, seemed to lift further still. You knew my mother chose him? I was young then too, Your Highness. I remember thinking it was the bravest thing I had ever watched anyone do. The Duchess's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I do not imagine you inherited your stubbornness from a stranger. The flight back to Loch Hollow was quieter than the one that had carried them away, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the anxious silence of a woman bracing for a life she hadn't chosen, but something settled and certain. They'll fight you on this, Daniel said, watching the coastline reappear beneath them. The council. The Valebrook house. There'll be consequences you can't predict yet. I know. Elara didn't look worried. Her ears were relaxed, her posture easy in a way he hadn't seen at the palace even once in 4 years of proximity. There may be a scandal. There may be difficult months ahead while the council adjusts to the idea that I am no longer a piece to be moved on their board. I am prepared for that. You seem very calm about difficult months. I spent 26 years being calm about a lifetime of them, married to a man I'd never chosen, doing my duty exactly as expected. She turned to him, and her smile was the same one from the ocean, unguarded and entirely hers. A few difficult months, spent fighting for a life I actually want, seems like remarkably good odds by comparison. And if the council refuses to accept it? If they try to force the Valebrook arrangement anyway? Then they will discover that I am my mother's daughter, and my mother once brought an entire council to a standstill over precisely this question, and won. Elara reached over and took his hand again, the gesture already familiar after a week, already necessary. I am not walking back into that palace to surrender, Daniel. I am walking back in to renegotiate the terms of my own life. I would like you beside me for that, if you're willing. I already told you, he said. There's nowhere else I want to be. The announcement, when it came 3 days later in the grand hall of Lark Hollow Palace, was not the quiet, dignified affair the council had hoped for. Word had already begun leaking through palace staff: the honeymoon booking, the Duchess Marrow's unusual silence on the matter, the sudden and complete absence of any Veilbrook engagement paperwork on Minister Colthorne's desk. And by the time Elara stood before the assembled court in her mother's old formal gown rather than anything the council had selected, the entire hall was humming with anticipation. I have called this assembly, Elara said, and her voice carried clear and steady across the grand hall, no tremor in it at all, to inform the court of my decision regarding my marriage. A ripple of murmurs. Daniel stood near the base of the dais, in his dress uniform, exactly where a security officer would traditionally stand, except that everyone in the room had already heard enough rumor to know that his position there meant something considerably more than protocol. For 4 months the marriage council has negotiated my future on my behalf, as is tradition, as was done for my mother and her mother before her. I am grateful for their service and their years of careful stewardship of the Crown's interests. She paused, and the hall held its breath with her. However, I did not spend my one requested week of freedom discovering that I wished to be married to a stranger for the sake of a treaty. I spent it discovering exactly the opposite, that I am capable of choosing my own life, and that I intend to do so, effective immediately. She turned and held out her hand, and Daniel, who had rehearsed exactly nothing for this moment because there was nothing you could rehearse for walking up the steps of a throne room in front of an entire assembled court, crossed the distance, and took it. This is Daniel Reyes, Elara said, loud enough to reach every corner of the hall. He has served the crown faithfully for 4 years, first as a member of palace security, and this past week as the man who reminded me what it feels like to be chosen rather than assigned. He is the person with whom I intend to build the rest of my life, and I would ask the court's blessing, though I will proceed with or without it. The murmur that followed was louder this time, a hall full of nobles processing a scandal that would, by dinner, be the only topic of conversation in every drawing room in the kingdom. Daniel caught sight of Minister Colthorne, pale and clutching his ledger like a life raft. He caught sight of the Duchess Marrow, arms folded, expression unreadable except for the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. And then, from somewhere near the back of the hall, a single voice, an elderly baroness Daniel recognized vaguely from garden functions, called out, "Good for her!" And the tension in the room cracked, just slightly, into something that might yet become laughter, or applause, or at minimum the beginning of acceptance. Elara's ears, Daniel noticed, were fully upright, nose twitching in that rapid, honest rhythm he'd learned to read like a second language over the course of one impossible week. "There is one more thing," she added, and her voice had gone warm now, almost playful, the vacation version of herself breaking through the formal court posture for just a moment. "Our honeymoon at Tidewell Retreat was interrupted rather earlier than planned. I intend to finish it. The council may resume its usual business in my absence. I will return in 1 week, considerably more married than I currently am, and fully prepared to discuss whatever consequences the court deems appropriate at that time." She looked at Daniel, ears high, eyes bright with something that looked exactly like the woman who dragged him into the ocean without waiting for his coffee to finish. "Well, Officer Reyes," she said, quiet enough that it was only for him, though half the hall was straining to hear it anyway. "Shall we go finish our honeymoon?" "Yes, Your Highness," Daniel said, and for the first time in 4 years of careful professional distance, he let himself smile at her in front of an entire watching court. "Lead the way." The garden path was quiet at 2 in the morning, the way it had always been, roses dark and heavy-scented in the night air. Elara found him there. Not pacing anxiously the way she once had, but simply sitting on the old stone bench, waiting, because he'd learned over the past year that she still came here sometimes when sleep didn't find her, and he'd rather be here waiting than anywhere else. Couldn't sleep? He asked, echoing a conversation that felt, now, like the first sentence of a much longer story. Not particularly. She settled beside him, tucking herself against his side with the easy familiarity of a year's worth of nights like this one. Her ears were relaxed up but loose, no trace of the rigid court posture she'd once worn like armor. The Veilbrook Treaty finally concluded today. Without my marriage attached to it, as it turns out. The kingdom did not, in fact, collapse. Shocking. Utterly. She smiled against his shoulder. Minister Colthorne has almost stopped flinching every time I walk into a room. Almost. Progress is progress. She tilted her head up to look at him, and even now, married a full year, ring on her finger, scandal long since faded into the kind of story courtiers told fondly at dinner parties, her ears still shot up at the sight of him, nose twitching in that same honest, unguarded rhythm. Do you ever regret it? Choosing the harder path. The scandal, the council's endless meetings, a wife who occasionally still terrifies half the nobility. Daniel considered the question the way he considered most things, carefully, honestly, without rushing toward the easy answer. I spent 4 years standing guard outside rooms where other people made all the decisions that mattered, he said. Then a princess with tired eyes and honest ears asked me what I thought, instead of what she expected to hear, and everything after that felt like finally getting to live my own life instead of just protecting other people's. He kissed the top of her head, right between her ears. No. No regrets. Just the 1 week I keep wanting to go back and repeat. We could, Elara said, ears lifting with sudden mischief. Tidewell Retreat still remembers us fondly. I imagine the honeymoon suite is available. We're not on our honeymoon anymore. No, she agreed, threading her fingers through his, settling more comfortably into the quiet dark of the garden where this had all begun. We're simply on the rest of it. I find I don't mind that it never quite ends.